any introductions, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Vinolia, who will just share with you the housekeeping rules for the session. Then I will take it over and introduce both the topic and the speaker for today. Thank you, Vinolia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ayanda. Greetings to everyone. I would firstly like to thank all of you for this wonderful opportunity to co-host this session today. Without any waste of time, I'm going to take you through some housekeeping rules. I'm going to request all of us to kindly mute ourselves, except for our speaker and Dr. Ayanda, who is our host today. And again, for those who have any questions during the session, they can write in our chat box before they forget. And if you would like to present your own question, you can kindly raise your hand and then you will be given the opportunity to state your question only after the presentation. You will only be given the opportunity after the presentation and you will present your question. Without any waste of time, I'm going to hand over to you, Dr. Ayanda, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Vinolia, for that. I would, Mr. Bagosi, please go to the first slide. Thank you. Thank you very much, Vinolia. With that, once again, welcome back to the first African Institute Supply Chain Research Game Changer series for 20. We had successful sessions last year, every last Tuesday of the month. And we will continue with having these sessions in 2022 and on the last Tuesday of the month. Our first session is, we are fortunate to be hosted by Mr. Ndabeni Bagosi. He's going to be chatting to us about the impact of African Continental Free Trade Agreement on supply chain management and sourcing strategies. I'd just like to introduce Mr. Bagosi to everybody. We are really fortunate today. Mr. Bagosi is an accomplished supply chain management leader who has presented in many local and international platforms. He is passionate about developing the next generation of leaders in procurement and supply chain and has a vast corporate and academic experience. He's a certified practitioner of lean management philosophy and has experience across several industries, including telecommunications, manufacturing, information technology, fleet, oil and gas, and as you can see, really great experience. He has also presented papers on various topics, including leadership in procurement, agility, and digital transformations as a tool to transform SCM to add commercial value to the bottom line. Mr. Bagosi is a board member of PEN South Africa and is also involved with academic institutions as a facilitator. Without delaying everyone and starting this session, I'd like to hand over to Mr. Bagosi to take us through his presentation for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayanda. Welcome to all delegates. Thank you for that nice introduction. So the way I suggest I'm going to move based on the ground rules given by Vinolia. So I'll go through the presentation. I'll try to be very slow, but not too much, so that you don't get asleep whilst I'm talking. But I'll emphasize points that I think they are very pertinent. So that's what I intend doing. I'm sure everybody can see me. Am I audible to everybody before I start?
Yes, you are, Mr. Bagosi. Yeah. I'd also like to just highlight that this is currently being recorded and you are also live on Facebook.
Thank you so much, Ayanda. So for that, I was glad to choose this topic, but I think this topic we're going to engage for a long time because, as you know, as the AU have intended to implement this trade agreement from the 1st of January 2021, that did not happen. And due to COVID, so the effective date was the 1st of January 2021, but it has not been effected. But in terms of ratification, all the administrative issues have been done. So let me just take you through this quickly. Good, thank you. So what I intend talking to you about, it's on the agenda. I just want us to discuss a little bit of what is Africa Trade Agreement, right? When I say Africa Trade in this discussion agreement, I refer to Africa Free Continental Free Trade Agreement and the objectives and the challenges. When I will be talking about the challenges, that will start stimulating you as a supply chain manager of what strategies and sourcing strategies you can start thinking of that you can implement in order to resolve problems here, the challenges here. I also wanted to discuss in relation to Africa Trade Agreement, discuss the North America Free Trade Agreement. And I chose NAFTA because it's the largest, massive, and extensive trade agreement that you can find in the world today. And I'll also talk about it and members, who are the members. At that point, I will share what were the failures of NAFTA that we can learn in an African continent. I will also share with you what were the benefits for the member countries. Immediately after that point, so I'll start getting personal with how should CPOs prepare themselves to implement and take advantage of the free trade agreement. The consideration are very practical, and we'll discuss that as well. And I'll also discuss how they impact, how I see Africa Trade Agreement impacting on how we do business today, how we source, the sourcing strategies that we need to implement. I will then share with you as delegates key takeaways for the implementation of this free trade agreement. Just as a start, the first figure, that is the map, that is the layer of the land of free trade agreement. So the countries in green, those are countries that have submitted or deposited instrument of ratification. Let me be quick by explaining that. So those countries which are green are countries that they can start trading tomorrow. So it means their respective governments have agreed to participate in the trade agreement. It means their parliaments have also agreed. It also means that they have signed the contract. And lastly, that they've accepted terms and conditions. So they've deposited the ratification instruments. Then you have the ones in gray. Those countries have signed, right? But have not deposited the instruments of ratification. What it means is that they've signed the agreement with the intention, but they have not signed the terms and conditions. So those are countries that have not, which cannot trade tomorrow. Then you have the one in red, which is Eritrea. So Eritrea, out of 55 countries, it has not signed. Due to their political stance, I did a lot of research why that. Effectively, they have a different approach. They wanted to have an incremental approach to trade agreement. They did not want to start participating in this huge global agreement. They felt that the participation should be gradual and incremental. They believe strongly in focusing in their economy. So they have not signed. It's the only country that have not signed. So let's just talk a little bit about this trade agreement. The objective really is to connect 1.3 billion people around the continent. The member states is 55 for African Union. The GDP is valued at $3.4 trillion, right? The target date for trading was the 1st of January this year. As I indicated already, 54 countries signed the agreement, 41 have deposited the instruments of ratification, and one that I've talked extensively about it now is Eritrea, who have not signed the agreement. So let's just talk broadly. What is the objective of this Africa Trade Agreement? The main key objectives, there are other ancillary objectives, connecting the continent, making sure that they foster us as Africans to work together. But the main point at this stage really is to reduce the tariff and non-tariff barriers and to promote fair competition amongst trading countries and to create a single market of 1.3 billion people. Also to increase investment opportunities and protect adequate intellectual property rights for different participants in the trading platform. To establish standards, it just makes sense. If you are trading across the country and you are a supplier based in South Africa or manufacturer based in Nigeria, the first thing that you'll do is to establish standards so that your products throughout the continent are the same. So this is what the trade agreement seeks to achieve. So what we know, everybody sitting around the table who's attending this, we have our own challenges as Africans in the continent. Supply chain trade agreement, the key driver is logistics, it's transportation, it's how, the barriers at different ports of entry. But what we do know is that we have a poor rail link system in Africa. South Africa was the largest country in Africa with extensive rail line, but today we have got challenges because of vandalism and other issues related to that. Then we have a poor road links. At the border posts, you have many inefficiencies that makes the transporters who want to transport goods to and from respective countries to stay longer at the borders, and they pay a lot of money for demurrage. Then in other countries, we have got political unrest, and the challenge for all of us, Africans, as we implement this trade agreement, is that we lack manufacturing capacity. I still foresee that the suppliers based in South Africa will import goods from China, or suppliers based in Cote d'Ivoire will import goods in China, then resell them in Africa. So if we don't take advantage and improve our manufacturing capacity, I don't really see us harnessing that opportunity of manufacturing for our own consumption. Remember, the trade agreement is that we have to manufacture for our own consumption and make sure that these goods move freely from one country to another. Africa, where it stands, I would argue now, our manufacturing capacity is not to where it is required. And you can see even now with the trading is, I think we trade 20% amongst ourselves, and most of the trading is European Union and China and other countries. So we have that challenge. Then we have high global trade barriers, and the global trade barriers that we experienced recently is about, when we wanted to manufacture the vaccine or produce the vaccine locally, many companies are complaining about their intellectual property rights. So we have those global trade agreements that we have to live with. Then we have higher trade taxes, which are not harmonized throughout the continent, which is really a challenge that we have to work with. So that is the layer of the land about our challenges today as African continent. So we have to work through this. And I suggest, and I think that's where, chief procurement officers, people in the supply chain management, we have to wrap our head around and make sure that we we have solutions for this. If we look across the Atlantic Sea, so we have what I just suggested to you. I chose this one. I could have chosen any trade agreement. There are different forms of trade agreements. I've chosen NAFTA because it's the most extensive one. So it consists of about 3 countries. On the north, you've got Canada, then you've got the US, then you've got Mexico. Yeah. So just quick notes about the NAFTA. As I indicated, it's 3 countries. It came into effect from the 1st of January, 1994. And that is what we're supposed, we must gear ourselves. When the trade agreement is implemented the first time, it's not a big, it's not a big bang approach, yeah? Is that it evolves over time as many politicians come, as you have lesson learned, and then you can improve on it. So it evolves, it takes its own life. So when it started in the US, it was few commodities which were identified to be traded, and it evolved over time. Now there are a number of line items that are being traded. So the 3 countries, the countries have already alluded to. And note what the next point that I'm going to make here. Its objective was, it connected 480 million people. Relative to our continent, which is 1.3 billion, a small number. But when it comes to the value of GDP, I indicated for us in Africa, the target is 3.4 billion, $3.4 trillion. Look at this trade agreement, it's about $20 trillion, which is a huge number. Just to make a point again, is the extensive one is 5 times the size of the European Union, and it's indicated that, and estimated that about 400,000 people cross the border every day between US and Canada. And the goods, transporting goods, doing business, which is in agreement. So it's a large number of people that are really crossing between these borders. And then you have the Mexican side. It was the subject of the previous president of the United States, because people were crossing as well based on this trade agreements, and they were illegal and not illegal ones. These are other things, but lots of people are crossing between the US and Mexico based on this trade agreement. So what were the immediate benefits that all member countries experience on this trade agreement? The first one is that the prices were lowered significantly because people could buy goods wherever they wanted to buy. And then Mexico became a place of cheap labor, and the goods which were bought from Mexico, they were cheaper than what people used to buy in the US and even Canada. So there was that benefit. There was a trade increase amongst all these countries, and there was also economic boom. All these countries benefited because that is the main objective of trade, economic growth, creating employment, creating opportunities for people. So all those were achieved. There were millions of jobs which were created. There was a massive investment in infrastructure, roads, rail, transport, sea between different trading countries. So there was a concerted, huge spin-off out of the investment. The unintended consequence, which was very good, and I think that will augur well in our situation. There was also huge diplomatic relations that increased between these countries. And everybody who follows current affairs, and those were lightly affected when the Trump administration took over, because of one of the things that we wanted to change, it was to change the nature and the terms and conditions of these trade agreements. And it was based on the reasons that I will advance in the next slide. There was also red taping reduced at the border posts, same standards, same system. When a truck leaves the US, it connects with the systems in Canada. So at the border, there's a little time lost. People can pass quickly, the clearing is done quickly. So the system will harmonize, synchronize with all countries, and there will benefits for all countries. The most important thing, that's what I alluded to now, is the bureaucratic red tape at the border post was reduced. So given all this picture, there were also downside of the NAFTA agreement. So there were massive job losses in manufacturing. And the reason for that is that the US, or especially the auto industry, they moved to a cheaper area where they could get cheap labor, the taxes were better, and they moved to Mexico. And you know exactly when Trump took over, said, I want jobs back, I want to manufacture in, then the approach was really focused on nationalism. And those were changes that we brought about. So it also impacted, and that's what we need to be mindful here in our respective countries, given that in respective countries, our African countries are relatively poor. You've got domestic issues that you have to face. You've got developmental issues that you have to face. You have SMEs to develop. But what happened in the US, it gives us a signal that we need to be more alert, because the SMEs and the small farming communities were just gone under the water with this trade agreement, because they could not compete with bigger companies who have financial muscle, who have the full footprint, who have like the know-how, and who could do things differently. The SMEs were very affected. And the third point, which affected the people in the US, was that the non-college educated workers in the US, their wage was suppressed, right? Because I mean, they could take somebody at the border of Mexico, they can take somebody, whoever is in this trade agreement, and those who did not have high skill, they could be replaced at a whim, right, and get another employee. Then in Mexico, because most of manufacturing companies like the auto industry, they moved to the US, that ended up impacting the environment. So the environment became, what it used not to be, because there were emissions which are not controlled. And lastly, there was exploitation of workers at the border of Mexico and the US. They were regarded as cheap labor. You can tomorrow as you like, or whenever you want. The conditions of employment were not respected. So those were the downside of the agreement, of NAFTA agreement. And I guess that's what we need to learn from as South Africans. So what I suggest that it needs to be in our mind as people in supply chain procurement and people in academia, when dealing with subject like Africa Trade Agreement, is that it's not going to come cheap. There will be transport costs involved. There would be border delays involved. There will be logistics, warehousing costs involved. We know the status of our conditions. We know other countries are politically unstable. So those are the issues that are going to face us, and we have to navigate through. Just to make an example, I used to be a procurement head of oil company, and we had a sister company based in Angola, and some of the suppliers in Angola, they were buying tanks from South Africa and shipping them to Angola, and they had other suppliers who were based in Argentina. So, and they told me a story that I still can't believe. It was easier for them and cheaper to import tanks, underground tanks for fuel from Argentina than South Africa, because of many barriers that I've indicated. The price of transport, it takes longer. At the border, there needs to be something to be done. for officials before the goods passes. So those are the things that we need to be alive to. So I suggest that we should keep this in mind. This really challenge that we'll have as practitioners to go to optimize, because if the main objective of trade agreements is to optimize, drive prices down, and make business easier, flow of goods easier. If we're not achieving that, then we have a problem. So what is the impact, which is the main topic now, the thrust of the topic? What is the impact of this on in our world of this trade agreement? So I suggest that whatever we do here, because we have unique circumstances, it's not NAFTA, the level of development is not the same, it's not Asia, it's not Singapore. We have to have our own approach. And I suggest that our approach should be a developmental mindset. If you are going to get involved in this trade agreement, you're going to buy goods from one country to another one, be alive to the reality of poverty, unemployment, youth unemployment, the history of colonialism, and so many ills, that companies that are going to participate, they should have developmental mindset. An example of that is the one Starbucks is doing in Africa. Wherever they procure coffee, their approach is always developmental. Look at the needs of the community, work with community leaders, and make sure that the environment is recommended, it's respected. And all delegates who are sitting here, I suggest to you, before you look where it's cheaper, put yourself you'll be buying from, and what are the needs there, and be alive to those. Your mind should be, how do we develop this community or this country for us to forever on a sustainable basis able to procure from them. The second one is inclusion of locals in sourcing strategies. That's the only sustainable strategy you can have. When you do business in any country, is to include the locals. They know the market, they're going to consume your goods, and whatever you do, it should be around sustainability. And if it doesn't meet that, then there's a problem. The other point is, I've already spoken about sustainability, is innovation. We have to do things differently. Africa is different. We have to be innovative and allow our minds to work outside the box. It's a new territory for us, but our leaders have identified an AU, and it's part of Agenda 2063, that we have to be an integrated economy, trade, and we should relate better, and the movements of goods and people should be different. Then the immediate point after that is that, so for chief procurement officer, is that the implication is that you have to work around the database, and your database has to be current, and it has to be current, and it should be authentic. You should know your suppliers. You know exactly where you buy what. Just to give you details on the trade agreement. Many countries have listed what they are going to trade in. For instance, Ghana, they've listed rice, and South Africa listed tobacco products and alcohol beverages. So in that trade agreement, when you deposit your ratification instruments, you clearly indicated which commodities that you're going to trade. So that is a startup. And as I indicated, if you think about NAFTA, which is the most extensive one, trading more than $20 trillion, 400 people passing the border every day. It started in 1994, but they started with few line commodities. Then after that, then they scale up and to be where they are today. So your database, you have to have your database of suppliers and understand their capabilities, their values, how they connect into your business, and how can they complement you. So I've put the International Purchasing Office here, and this is an example of most companies and corporate that I've worked for and who started looking at what we call LCC. LCC is low-cost countries. So these companies, they identified East Europe, then it was East Europe and China to be low-cost countries. What they did, and I suggest, and I think it's going to happen with South African companies and African companies who are based somewhere based on their capabilities. Then they establish in a, let's say, a hosting country where they're going to source staff or their goods and services. They establish what they call international purchasing office. And they have a person who's there and with their staff. So this person is responsible to interact with the suppliers in that country, make sure that they meet their standards, they do due diligence, they vet them, and they give the different respective offices of procurement wherever they are operating. Here are the suppliers that we've vetted in Cote d'Ivoire. Here are the suppliers that would have vetted in Kenya, in Nigeria, and this their status. But they have their own person who's trained, who's there to make sure that the standards, quality, everything is met. The most thing that, which what I'm passionate about, is this agility thing. Is if you don't implement agility, and I must say, let me be specific, agility that includes digitalization, so that you can track your goods, where they are, how far they are, as they move, the tracking system, and that is happening well in developed countries where you have. You can also be, manage the demand, because these goods will be coming on this date, and you can inform your internal customers, and everybody can be informed around the business that we have delays there, we have delays there, and there's a visibility of transportation. So that has to be in place for us to reap the benefits of this, because it's all about efficiencies. The next point is collaboration, what they call 1 + 1 = 3 mindset, right? I've already alluded what are the challenges that we face as the African continent as transport. What solutions can we implement for us to overcome those challenges? So the 1 + 1 3 = 3 mentality. It helps you to identify in the supply chain things that are not your core business. For instance, if you are manufacturing, you may decide to partner with a transport company which is in logistics to move the goods for you. For instance, when you are based in somewhere in Nigeria, you can decide that for you to move goods to another country, they call it in sourcing and logistics, they call it co-loading. You can load together in order to make sure that the container, when it leaves that country, it goes, it's fully utilized. You can also utilize the skills and experience of other companies that have done business in that country before you. So in that way, you collaborate, you share experiences, return on experiences, and you work with other players who have been there. It makes it easier for you. You can't do everything for yourself. So that's the most important point of collaboration. So for you to meet the demands of your customers and stay in business, the supplier relationship management becomes inevitable. You have to do it. You have to understand the limitation of the suppliers wherever they are based in the world, their capabilities and their delivery schedule, and also understand the gaps between what you require from them and what they can deliver, so that you can get, each and every country where they source, they must have information about it. And not information, political. Okay, that is disturbing a little bit, but it doesn't matter. So what the AU is doing, and the different trading zone are doing to make sure that there's a free flow of goods in Africa, in accordance to AU Agenda 2063. There's a huge project that was supposed to be completed last year in Tanzania. So it's Tanzania Standard Gauge. So it's a train that will connect Rwanda, Uganda, Burundi, and DRC. It's part of the East Africa Railway Master Plan. I won't talk about the train that we grew up hearing about the train from Cape to Cairo. I don't know when it's going to start, but I do know in South Africa, there's a huge drive to recapitalize rail network system. And I'm sure it would connect. There's a master plan somewhere for SADC, because the approach is capacitate the trading blocks, that is the regions, SADC, ECOWAS, Central Africa, and North Africa, and thereafter have links. So it, not all is bad. There's something which is happening. There's this train of Tanzania Standard Gauge, which aims to connect those countries. Then in Cairo, there's also a huge project in Cairo, electric train. It's a fast train, but it's aimed at connecting Cairo to new cities. It's not clear where those new cities are, but it's part of improving our connectivity in the region. So there's something that is being done on the ground. It's not to say that things are not happening. I wanted on these 2 slides to capture that, that the interventions, there are plans that have been done, there are bricks, funding that has been sought after, and there's also a World Bank. So there are lots of initiatives to develop the transport infrastructure in the region. So what are the key takeaway lessons that I want us to live with? And they are not limited here. It's what I could analyze, observing what is going to happen, and analyzing the logistic value chain. Is that when you do business in Africa, the key lesson is that African countries are not homogeneous. They're unique in development. What makes it worse, the currencies are not the same. Then you've got different tax regime. The level of developments are not the same. So just have that in mind. We might be one trading bloc, but be alive to the uniqueness of each and every country. Also, anybody who's doing business in Africa needs to be sensitive to the cultural and political ecosystem of each country. We've seen it here in South Africa, what happened with H&M being culturally insensitive to Black people. So that will happen throughout in the trading zone. People and practitioners and people who are doing business, they need to be alive to that. And in Africa, relationships matters. Sometimes you might not have a contract like you and I know that, a contract has to be like this and this and this. Somebody say, okay, you can come and load this, I've got this and this and this and this. So we have our own unique way of doing business, and in every country and continent, the Chinese have got their own way of relating and doing business to each other. And we have our own way, same as the Europeans, same as another country. We don't have to feel bad about that. That's how we are. The most important one, which is really about behavior, is that for us Africans, respect and trust means everything. You could buy goods from another supplier, but the reason why I'm buying from you is because I've got a relationship with you and I trust you and I respect you and you respect me. So the other point I've already made is poverty. So you have that developmental mindset when you do business in just different countries. It's not about just taking out of the fridge, make sure that you replenish the fridge. We should not use what I would call the colonial mentality about Africa. What has been happening in Africa is just taking out of the fridge, taking out minerals, nobody is replacing. Then we have different tariff regime, legislations, governance. And what makes it worse with us is, we have the Anglophone, Francophone, we have countries like Angola, Mozambique, which is more based on Portuguese. So we are quite different. The most important one is learn to conduct due diligence, because you can be swindled in Africa if, not Africa only, anywhere, you have to do due diligence. If a supplier says, I've got a factory, that and that, you have to go and see the factories there. Whatever they say they may have, you must do due diligence. Then the next point is about the country's liquidity, the status. In Africa, that is a common problem. We know in Zimbabwe today, if we do trade, there's a country liquidity problem, same as Malawi, same as Mozambique. So you need to understand how to do trade, because you may be expected to be paid today to pay your suppliers, but only X amount can be available from the Reserve Bank. So you have to understand that. Inevitably in Africa, the relationship with ruling elite makes business easier for you. I do know that we have all these anti-corruption laws that you have to declare, but I've been practicing in supply chain and procurement for years. Our situation remains the same. We have to have relationships with the ruling elite. So that is my last slide. I'll take questions. If I miss some points, I think this is the opportunity to discuss those points. Thank you, Ayanda. Thank you, Vinolia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bagosi, for that presentation. At this juncture, I would like to open the floor for any questions from the floor. I've also been monitoring the chat, so I'll be able to advise you, Mr. Bagosi, if there are any questions in the chat. But with that, can I open up any questions for Mr. Bagosi from the floor? Thokozani, I'm not sure if you have a question as you were okay, you put yourself back on mute. Are there any questions? You can either raise your hand or just take your microphone off mute.
Yes, this is Mike Manga. Good day, Ayanda, and to all participants. Thanks so much to Mr. Bagosi for this enlightening and insightful presentation. What I noticed is that the various countries are at different stages of ratification of the trade agreement. To what extent is this going to impact on implementation of this agreement? And also, even if those that have ratified decide to proceed at the annotated time, to what extent will the delay of ratification by other states impinge on effectiveness of the trade agreement? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's Dr. Manga.
Yes, it is.
Yes, I recognize you. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? I'll take one or two more. Mr. Bagosi can then answer all of those questions. Yes, Jerome Jacobs.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was a brilliant presentation. I wanted to find out when Mr. Ndabeni was talking about NAFTA and about the Trump era and the impact on trade. I wondered whether there was any calculation of the actual cost of that tenure to the entire agreement in the three countries that are involved in that arrangement. Thank you. Sorry, Ayanda, you are muted.
So thank you for that, Jerome. Are there any other questions? I do note your comment, Prof. Simon. With that, perhaps I can ask Mr. Bagosi if he can please answer those two questions. Prof. Simon does have a follow-up question after you've answered the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ayanda. Let me start with Dr. Manga. Did I pronounce it well?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Okay. Prof, so AU, because you know this trade agreement for years, I mean, Africa have been talking about the implementation of free trade agreement. They've quantified the benefits, there were feasibility study, and actually the turning point, I mean, where they decided we have to go ahead, it was when they was in Kigali. That's when many countries deposit their instruments of ratification. The way I see it as a practitioner and having been involved in high-scale intensive projects like this one, I actually think it's a blessing. Yeah, you can imagine 54 countries, one day, boom, on the system, and they are failures. I just feel that this opportunity, of starting gradually and having few countries trading, it will make sure that we learn quickly what goes wrong and fix it, so that when everybody is on board on the platform, things just flow. I see it as an opportunity. But in terms of what you're asking, how does it impact the implementation? The implementation ratified by AU, people can trade, is that we had this COVID which closed things from January 2021. Countries can start trading. I've been following developments, on social media, including LinkedIn. I've seen South African government was in Ghana 2 weeks ago, and people are starting to make sure that things that they agreed on, they really trade. It will impact in terms of the targeted value of GDP. It won't be 3.4 billion because it will be smaller countries. But for me, 41 out of 55 is not bad in any standard.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that certainly does put it into perspective. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Then to Jerome, Jerome, I've tried to get as much as information as much as possible, except political. I can quantify that there was the political consequences between the US and Mexico. There was also a strain between the relationship, diplomatic relationship between US and Canada that we have seen, but in terms of quantifying it, I don't know, right? I would suggest that if the Trump term could have been elected for second term, the implication economically, it could have been huge because he could have stopped that. Basically, the strategy is that I stop all this trade agreement, I manufacture and do anything in the US, America for Americans. I don't deal with other people. I look internally, nationalist approach. The fortunate thing about democracy is that you get for them it's even better because it's 4 years. If people don't like what you're doing, they vote you out. But if you wait longer, I would suggest that, and I think so, the economic repercussions could have been far deeper, but I don't have that information in terms of rands and cents or in terms of dollars. But in terms of, we do know there was a strain over time between Trudeau, Trump, and Mexico. The diplomatic relations were strained, very strained.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Bagosi. I'm going to just take some questions that are in the chat. We have Patrick, who says, in respect with all that is said, do we really need to continue cooperating? He cited SADC, COMESA, etc. I'm actually going to flip this to Patrick and ask him what his opinion is and why we shouldn't cooperate. And then I'll ask Mr. Bagosi to also put his 5 cents in. Patrick? That exists, and he's asking for your opinion. As a second question, whilst you think about that, is coming from the chat as well. The last one, relationship with the ruling elite, what does that imply? As Africans, we know very well the behavior of the ruling elite, where a president and his cronies become richer than the country. What E.g. Dos Santos' daughter, can Mr. Bagosi unpack this, please? So Ziba Ntoto is talking about your last key lesson in terms of relationship with the ruling elite, just asking you to talk to a little bit to that as well. And then I'm going to allow Prof. Simon to come off mute and also ask his, and that will be the third
of NAFTA was to be implemented in ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and Thailand particularly would not sign up for NAFTA. There were 2 occasions where the Prime Minister refused to sign for NAFTA simply because he said Thailand wasn't ready. At that time, I was doing some studies on why Thailand would not want to be part of the NAFTA. Now, one of the main worries was that with the whole aspect of NAFTA, there is going to be movement across the border, free movement, not just for trade, but in terms of labor and so on. And skilled labor would be able to move from one country to the other. Now, the Thais, on their own hand, were afraid that most of the jobs would be taken by skilled professionals who are better, because one of the main concepts was English language. Now, Thailand ranks very low in terms of English language, and they were afraid that there was going to be a high competition in the job market, and most of the jobs were taken away, until the Prime Minister was given a vendetta that if by this time you do not be part of this, we would go ahead and implement it. So my question to Prof is Africa ready for such a thing? And when this happens, there are some countries that will face a lot of difficulties where the jobs will be taken over by people who are more knowledgeable in that field. How will this problem be solved? And what do you envisage if such a thing was to happen in Africa? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. Simon. I think that is linked to the question about, do we really need to continue to cooperate after SADCs and the COMESAs? With that, I'm going to hand over to you, Mr. Bagosi, to tackle the 3 questions in any order that you wish. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Ayadna. I will start with Mr. Ziba. Mr. Ziba, the ruling elite. About the last point that I made about relationship with the ruling elite. The reality is that in Africa and most part of the world, the political elite are your regulators. You can think about any industry. If you take telecommunication, the political elite will be, government will be, or the ministry will be your regulator. You can think about oil and gas, the regulator is Department of Minerals and Energy. Even in the US and developed countries, favorable legislation for their companies in which they can operate. So you can't divorce that from an economic system. You have to work with the ruling elite. I was not suggesting that the ruling elite must do you favors, but you have to understand as a business person where the country is going, where the legislation are, so that you can adapt your business according to how the politicians think, how the legislation is going to look. So it's inevitable for me. You have to have that relationship. Especially in developing countries, business is driven by politics. So I don't know how you would really say, okay, they are corrupt. I'm not talking about things that are wrong, which are happening, but I'm saying political economy is inextricable. They always one influence each other. So you have to understand that. Then an issue about let me see we talk about the ruling elite. Then let me go to Thailand quickly. Yes, like I indicated in my presentation, that there are downside for a trade agreement. Even when we don't have a trade agreement, I mean, we see what is happening to South Africa is people have been fighting, and what is quite xenophobia, which is really subject for politician, but I see it as people just fighting for scarce resources. Yeah. If you want to do business in a sustainable way in those countries, like Thailand, and you know that the consequences of it, I've already indicated the consequences of it. You might have job losses. You have to have a developmental mindset. Know that here we have challenges. Even when I employ, but I have to give preference to the locals. So it has to be an intentional. If you leave it like what is happening in my country, the other one talks about quotas, the other one I've worked for multinationals who are in European Union. If I wanted to go and work in any country in the European Union, the first thing before I'm issued with a work visa, they would ask the common things that they do. Do I not have these skills in this country? What challenges do we have? Can we allow these people to come? Are you coming for training? Are you coming to develop the locals to acquire the skills that you have? So you have to have a regime. You can't leave it openly. But yes, there are consequences, negative consequences, but those needs to be managed, like you indicated in Thailand. I don't see not signing an agreement would assist you. When you sign an agreement, there's always consequences. But what you have to do is to know, what am I going to do? And even people who are partners there, they would have knowledge that the rules of trading in this country is 49% of the business will be owned by locals. The skills will come from the locals. So those things need to be clear. You can't leave them to market forces. Then you lose control about that. Then the gentleman who was talking about, is there a need for us, knowing all these problems that we have, to even force or go ahead with trade agreement? Remember, our main vision as Africans, and that's why we are where we are today. Each and every continent, that's why they're developed. They have trade agreements, yeah? And they have a union. We belong to African Union. This is driven by African Union. We are one people. So the way the Kwame Nkrumah started this whole thing of African Renaissance is that the vision still remains one Africa, right? But how to get there were many scenarios. And the scenario of trading blocks, let's start with SADC, ECOWAS, Eastern African Community of Central Africa North, they were trading blocks that eventually would allow us and bring us to the main trading platform, which is the Africa Free Continental Free Trade Agreement. So that is the pathway towards where we need to go ultimately. If we decide that we're not going to trade, I don't know any country which is developed, no, not country, I don't know any continent which is developed, which is not trading amongst themselves. Take our situation again, and I'm going to put a rough figure because it changes every day. Africans among themselves, they trade 20% of their entire GDP. But we trade more with Europe and China. So if it means we'll be dependent on those countries forever. And what happens? They manufacture for us, and the jobs, they get all the benefits. So we'll be a consuming continent, and that's why we need that's why we need this. That's why we need all these trade agreements to make sure that we produce our own. We have our own rules. So it's very important. It's how many countries have moved forward. There's no way that Africa can move from where it is and become a global player. Just keep this in mind. Just keep this in mind. It's 1.3 billion people. If we don't feed ourselves, somebody will feed us, right? And that person will make a fortune out of us, will be forever imported. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bagosi, for even that history lesson quoting Kwame Nkrumah and the vision that was and still remains. Are there any other questions? I'll give an opportunity for people in the room to take themselves off the mic and ask Mr. Bagosi some further questions or comments. Professor Simon, I see that your hand is up. I'm not sure if it's current or an old hand. Okay, noted.
Oh, sorry about that. That was an old hand. I guess the hands are becoming too old.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any
just to comment,
yes.
Ayanda. Prof. Simon, just to also to bring another point, it doesn't mean that if a country has signed this agreement, we have an agreement with Thailand, but I don't know under which agreement, the main one, Prof. So when we buy, even most of the oil companies you share, they buy cylinders from law. There's a special bilateral trade agreement that has been signed. We have agreement as South Africa with European Union. We have agreement with BRICS. So different countries have got different forms of trade agreements, and they will remain in that. But this is trade for us, amongst us, the conditions for us. And I can tell you now, Prof. Simon, most of the, whatever cylinder, I'm sure 70% of the cylinders of gas that you see here, they've been bought by Thailand. I'm talking about South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I do appreciate your response as well.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Yes, please.
Yes, Jerome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Mr. Bagosi answered parts of my question around purchasing from outside where things are cheaper and also less tariffs and so on. And I was feeling guilty about that because I had this idea of bringing things in from China, and I know that the essence of this is intra-Africa trade. So the question that I have in mind is now, where do we begin? Because I do know that a lot of South Africans, particularly young South Africans, hear of intra-Africa trade agreement, but have no wherewithal to begin positioning themselves to trade with neighboring countries, specifically the countries that have signed the ratifications. And also there's also some fear of other countries wanting to take things from South Africa as if we are the ones with all the things and other countries don't have. So where do we begin?
Yeah, do you want me to respond now? Jerome, for me, it starts, and I think government is doing that. Beginning of this year, there was an expo of Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement in Durban, but it was just after Christmas, and you had this corona restriction. But I do know it was there. The first part is awareness, education. What can you do? What does it entail? And then that is the first layer. So the first layer is to dealing with what we have, just creating awareness of what we have. What can you buy? What can you do that? How you can trade. The second one, and many leaders, African, especially Paul Kagame, then is the real one. Where do we manufacture what for what? Where, right? Then is to increase the manufacturing capacity. So the other one which complements that, I've shown you already, those two high intensive capital projects that are taking place in the region. But in managing perception, why should we do that? Why should we do that? That people have to be aware that if you trade together, it's bigger, yeah? You get more benefits. But if we don't trade amongst ourselves, we'll always be a continent which is dependent on other continents. So it's more education, awareness, and leaders doing it, and making sure that there's visibility. People can see really there are benefits in trading among ourselves. Other people, remember, most of us Africans, we don't travel to other countries. South Africa is my home, and you don't know what's happening in other countries, what you can get. So I see them as short-term project, but it's about behavior, it's about awareness, is to make people engage with their own continent and understanding what does this Africa Continental Agreement mean to me? Is it going to make what I'm buying now at this price cheaper when is traded in my continent? So those are the real experiences that needs to be shared. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bagosi. Jerome also adds in the chat, thank you. He was scheduled to go to the expo in Durban and he got cancelled. So he also added in the chat.
I'm sorry about that.
Yes, we also coming from the chat, we have Patrick, who still does not appreciate, he says, these so-called trade agreements, when we have restrictive protectionist trade barriers of our own. He's coming from East Africa, and he says they can't allow, in East Africa, they're still not allowed to trade products among themselves. So he remains quite pessimistic about these trade agreements. And I think it's just more of a comment, but Patrick, if it's more than a comment, you're welcome to just contribute to the discussion. I would also like to just add and bring in the procurement practitioner space to say, so you have people like Patrick who are quite pessimistic but what can we do as procurement practitioners to support the implementation of these trade agreements? And maybe something that, I don't know if Patrick is a practitioner, but any just comments? I know that you spoke a bit about it, but any comments you'd just like to share again?
Ayanda, I stand a chance of repeating myself. It's a problem that we all acknowledge. We just have to do something and support each other and share information. And the platform that you have created here is a powerful platform. Yeah? is to use these platforms to exchange ideas, experiences, and also raise concern, like Patrick is raising them sharply. And I'm sure it's not at this level only, also. I mean, if one country out of 55 countries decided, no, we're not going to be part of this. So it's a legitimate concern. So it's things that we have to work through. But if you take what I said initially when I was talking about NAFTA, it was 1994, and up to today, they are still learning some stuff new and improving every day and closing the gaps. So it's not overnight thing. It will go over time, years and years. But to say, no, let's move away, what is the option? What alternative do we have? I don't think we've got an alternative. We have to work through all these difficult circumstances.
Thank you very much. Once again, opening up to the floor, if there are any other questions that, or even comments that people would like to make. Oh, okay, I thought that it was a comment. Precious, you put yourself on mute. Are there any questions or comments that people would like to make with regards to the presentation? Okay, having said that, I should take this opportunity to thank Mr. Bagosi for his presentation, and also thank him for being the first speaker in our Game Changer series. I'm hoping that we were able to get some nuggets in terms of what we can do as practitioners, and also just understanding what other trade agreements are look like. What are some of the challenges that they are dealing with, so that we can use them as learnings as we move into our own trade agreement within Africa, so that we can actually improve based on their learnings. And Mr. Bagosi was really able to share with us also from a procurement practitioner space, how do we contribute and how can we assist as we work towards the vision of the great Kwame Nkrumah, and make things, make trading amongst each other a lot better, and also just make it work, because it is for us in Africa, it's for us, the continent. So really, thank you. I will actually use this opportunity also to steal Jerome's words that I read in the chat, where he says Mr. Bagosi is really a game changer himself. He's really a game changer himself. I want to go to China to study so I can understand their trade. I feel more inspired to carry through with that, with an aim to improve my continent. So, Mr. Bagosi, you've really, thank you very much. As I indicated at the beginning of the session, we will be having these game changer sessions on the last Tuesday of every month in the afternoon. You are welcome to join us again. We will be sending out the details of the speakers in the next sessions, and also indicating that these sessions are recorded. So should you want a copy of the recording, you can contact the AISCA office, African Institute of Supply Chain Research office, and they can provide you with a copy of the recordings for the sessions. With that, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you very much for your support. And thank you, Mr. Bagosi, for your time, both in preparing the presentation and your time sharing with us. Thank you, everyone, and have a good afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. Thank you.
Good. Ayanda, the final one, I just want to say to you, I'm also indebted to the Institute, and I think you're doing a great work. Thank you for the opportunity. I've been getting private chats about my contact details. I really don't mind if you give people my private details, then we can communicate. That's the only way we can grow. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Mr. Bagosi. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you and bye-bye.